Stadium's Wrigley Field build part 7. Oh yeah, here we go. Dig it. Last week you saw me build 60 of these pillars, these beams, cross sections. I never knew what exactly to call them. This week I'm standing them all up. They're going to circle the grandstand and create the upper deck. The upper deck was added to Wrigley Field during the 1927 and the 1928 seasons, and I thought that was the first major expansion that Wrigley Field saw. So when I was doing research for what to talk about during this video, trying to figure out more about that upper deck expansion, I found out that a few years before the upper deck, there was a different major expansion, the first major expansion that came before the upper deck was added to the stadium. The way they did that expansion was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And I'll talk about that in a second, but first let's talk about what you see in the video here. The first thing I did when building the upper deck is I put up all the sectional pieces that have a beam that goes into the stadium seats. These are the ones that are most important to the structure. And then one of the things I did, a little behind the scenes view for you Paper Stadium fans wondering how I do all this, is at some point I hung the stadium upside down and put paper clips on it and used gravity to try and straighten out some of those beams so they're nice and straight as I continue the upper deck expansion. Now, let's talk about that first expansion to Wrigley Field that I was talking about that came before the upper deck and actually happened in between the 1922 and 1923 seasons. Maybe you have noticed this, or maybe you never have, but if you look at Wrigley Field from above, you'll see that the third base dugout is perfectly straight and the first base dugout kind of dog legs. This also happens with the entire grandstands. If you look at the third base side grandstands, it's pretty straight, it curves just a little bit. Whereas the first base side grandstands takes a sharp turn right about that point in the dugout that I was talking about. And you can also see that sharp turn on the roof and on the exterior of the stadium. This is all part of that first major expansion to Wrigley Field. So in order to explain what happened, let's go back to what Wrigley Field originally looked like. In order for Charles Weigman to build Wrigley Field, or what would become Wrigley Field, for his Chicago Whales of the Federal League, he bought a city block where a Lutheran seminary used to be. Now the very first mistake they made is they didn't build it right in the middle of that city block. They actually put the right field fence right up against Sheffield Avenue, which left a lot of space behind the third base grandstand, maybe for horse buggy parking, who knows. But they wedged it right up into the corner, right up against Sheffield Avenue. So by 1922, when William Wrigley was now the owner of the team, and he wanted to expand Wrigley Field, they didn't really have a lot of space to do it unless they could be really innovative. So these blueprints right here show that innovative idea. The idea? Split Wrigley Field into 3 sections and spread 2 of those sections out and make room for more expansion. But think about this. This was 1922. There wasn't exactly a lot of machine power back then. Probably the most powerful machine would be a train, but there's no way they got that in the middle of Wrigleyville. The F-150 some of you might drive is more powerful than most of the cars that existed back then. How exactly did they move those 2 gigantic sections of the stadium? No matter how much I look into it, I really can only find a few paragraphs on this expansion in the first place, and all they really say is the stadium was moved on rollers. So I ask you, did they just recruit a bunch of men and have them pick it up? You might say that's ridiculous, but look at this footage of men picking up a barn and moving it. As fun as it is to think about men moving the stadium, my educated guess is that they probably did it using horses. Lots of horses. Give me more horses. Show more horses. There we go. So once all the horses were strapped up, the first thing they did was they moved the stadium 60 feet to the west and used up as much space on the corner of Addison and Clark as they could. And then the next thing they did is took the third base grandstand and moved that one north all the way up to Waveland Avenue. There it goes. These horses were a little bit slower because the grandstand's a lot bigger. So once the stadium was all spread out, you were left with these gaps around the home plate area. And all they did was fill those in with seats and that's how most of the seats were added during that 1923 expansion. The other thing they did was move the infield, because obviously you can't have it that far away from the third base grandstand, and they actually rotated the field about 3 degrees, which allowed them to add box seats in the first few rows of the grandstand. And really, that's the story there. That's how the first expansion of Wrigley Field took place. They literally picked up 2/3 of the field and moved it. Now, moving grandstands aren't totally unheard of. They did happen in a lot of the cookie cutter stadiums in the 1960s and 1970s. A good example would be the way the entire grandstand was moved at Mile High Stadium, and one you might not know is movable, Aloha Stadium in Honolulu. But the first thing is, those stadiums were designed to do that. Wrigley Field wasn't designed to move in 1922. On top of the fact, those stadiums were designed in the 60s or 70s, 40 to 50 years after Wrigley Field was built. They had much greater machine power in the 60s and 70s than they did back in the 20s. Hopefully that story blew your mind as much as it blew my mind, and you enjoyed it. I've never heard of a team expanding a stadium by literally moving it. If you have, if there's other instances, drop it in a comment and let me know, because it's very interesting to find out. Let's get to a fan question here. Brandon says it's fun to follow my progress. I agree. But he says not to propose more work, but if I have any plans of adding the buildings with rooftop seats that are across the way from Wrigley Field. There are a lot of things that make Wrigley Field unique that you don't see at other ballparks, from the ivy on the outfield walls, the marquee in the corner of Clark and Addison, and the big manually operated scoreboard in center field. But also another one of the things that makes the park unique is the rooftop seating. That being said, I'm not going to include them because in order to make this look good, I don't think it would do Wrigley Field and Wrigleyville justice just to do the one row of houses that are beyond the left field and the right field wall. Thank you for posting that question though, Brandon. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate anybody that is willing to interact with me here on YouTube. It gives me something to talk about during these videos. Make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you can keep up with the progress of Paper Wrigley Field, and also hopefully learn more about the history of Wrigley Field. I have a lot of stuff planned to talk about that I'm going to talk about in the next couple videos. Now here's the last thing I'm going to talk about during this video. I'm not one to beg for money, but I did start a Patreon so I can start raising some to help fund some of the stuff I want to do with this channel and with my Paper Stadium projects. I linked it in the description, and if you click there, you'll see that there's a $1 membership, a $5 membership, and a $14 membership. I really would appreciate anything. These stadiums aren't really that expensive to build, but even a $1 membership is going to help me supplement some of the stuff I'm spending money on, and I don't have to explain it to my wife if I'm making the money myself, right? There are 3 levels of memberships, and the 3rd level, if you sign up for that one, let me know on any one of my social media platforms, and I will draw you a print of your favorite team's football field, all in Sharpies, all hand done, the same way I drew the print for this field here at Wrigley and the field at Memorial Stadium. You can get one of those for yourself. Thanks for following along with this project. I really hope you enjoyed the little history tidbit I threw in there with the moving stadiums, because like I said, it just totally blew my mind when I learned it, and I had to share it with people. Since I made so much progress in 1 week doing the upper deck scaffolding, I'm throwing in, for the last minute of this video, everyone's favorite feature, Super Light Speed. Next week I'm going to announce something that I'm doing really cool with this Wrigley Field project where you have a chance to contribute. So make sure to stay tuned. Hit my logo there in the left-hand corner to subscribe, and I will catch you on the flippity flip.